And greetings. Welcome to the Evidence Reasons Academy. I'm Salvador Cordova, and I am really privileged to be joined by my occasional co-host, Emory Moyna, a graduate student of biology, top of his class. Praise God for that. And he's a creationist. And
I don't know about top of my class, Sal. But
I just realized you're creation biology.
yes.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right,
I think
Sal.
you showed up on my stream about Kent Hovind recently.
It's all good. All good.
Wow, I was like, who's that guy? He's he seems very articulate. It's like, I didn't know that was Emory. So, well, then you heard what happened Sunday. I blew off the steam. We'll focus on more important topics, really, at this point.
Yeah, I heard part of it. I had to leave partway through, but I heard part of it. I mean, I don't disagree with anything you said in particular. I just, I worry about the source, but I mean, based on I hadn't read the article at the time when I made that comment. Having now read the article, I went, oh my word, there's a pattern here, and that's an ugly looking pattern. And I know from speaking with Cindy that I'm fairly certain that what she says is true. I mean, obviously, I wasn't there, and I only have her word for it, so I can't be 100% sure. But she seems fairly credible to me, so I don't have issues with anything you said.
Oh, thank you. Well, the thing is, it's like, okay, let's just take what Hovind said out of his own mouth. I'm just like, oh my gosh. Yeah. I'm just like, all right. And then it's like, oh, let's take an affidavit that's sworn by some of his own people. It's like, oh, they have outstanding warrants for them. You know, just come on. Mm-hmm. And they're staff workers that in a place for kids. I'm like, all right, you know, doesn't matter that it came from the Daily Beast.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I shouldn't laugh. But thank you for visiting. You know, there's enough bad stuff in the world. I could just spend the rest of my life just whining about it. And it's hard not to whine because there is a lot. And the days are evil, as it says. It's one of my favorite passage in Ephesians saying, you know, be wise, conduct yourselves wisely, and you know, your time. So let's try to do that today. And I'm going to have to set aside some really intense personal feelings about all this and just try to be disciplined. And speaking of Mr. Discipline, oh my goodness, Emory. I got to tell you, it's like, okay, you work, you go to school and you do homework. And I call Emory I try to contact Emory during the semester. He'd say, yeah, I'm working. I go to class and I have to do homework. And it's like every day like that. I'm just like, oh, what a man.
Well, not to be, I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm bragging on myself at all, but it's still sort of that way because I'm still working. And now instead of doing class in the evening, I'm turning my thesis into a paper to go to a secular peer-reviewed journal. So my evenings are largely shot.
Well, then all the more I am extremely grateful. And Peter's here, Paleologos.
Yeah, Peter, good evening.
Yeah, good evening. Hey, Peter, I got to tell you, you know, sometimes I hope, you know, look, Emory and I will make jokes about someone that's close to you, and you know, this has nothing to do with you, but all right. So just wanted to let you know, and I hope we could still be friends. And hey, you know, I'm delighted to see you. So we students got to stick together, and we have two topics tonight. And Emory's, you know, I'm trying to spare Emory's voice. He's kind of recovering.
My voice is in fit shape. I'm good to go. If I need more water, I can always go get it.
And I have a lot going on in my life right now. And I really didn't have time for this or anything else. But it's like, yeah, you know, I need to have a little bit of levity to kind of lift the spirits so I can at least function. Because there's just heaviness all over the place. Just turn on the news. I mean, one of the people that frequent this channel, Mr. Jetty89, he lives in Ukraine. Need I
Oh
say
boy.
more?
That
And
would explain why I haven't seen him around as much recently.
well, he's on my heart a lot, and I follow the news. And he's emailed me and he said, Sal, I'm praying for you. I know you're going through a lot. I was just like, oh my goodness,
You're going through a lot.
you're going through a lot. So
I mean, not trying to make light of what you're going through, Sal, but he literally lives in a war zone.
So why don't we just say a prayer for people in the side chat and just reflect on things. Heavenly Father, I lift up Mr. Jetty89 out there in Ukraine. You can hear the explosions, and Lord, we're hearing that the Russians are going to be having a powerful offensive. And Lord, there are Christians on both sides of this conflict. Some people are just misled, just like in the American Civil War. At least one side had to be wrong. And Lord, you said there'll be wars and rumors of wars. So we lift up the believers on both sides of this conflict. And please protect Mr. Jetty and, Lord, prevent the Russians from invading his land. And I know that may mean even more war and conflict and deaths, but Lord, I lift up your people. I lift up the Christians there in Ukraine and all over the world. And Christianity has flourished in the midst of famines, pestilence, and war. And we praise you and honor you for that. I lift up Janet Duttridge, a widow and a disabled Christian woman. You've said true religion is attending to widows and orphans in their distress. And there's so little I could do except to offer my compassion and love and prayers. Please be with our speech tonight. Help us to have fun, glory, and honor and glorify you. In Jesus' name, amen. So I just, let's just briefly talk about, I have, it's on the internet. Do you have any thoughts about Walter Remind, the co-founder of Baraminology?
I actually may or may not have just done a full-length read of his paper that went up on my channel yesterday. I may or may not have done that. There are things I like about Remind's discontinuity systematics. There are things I don't like. It's the problem with it is it's not been fleshed out enough. Some things got ported over. Kurt Wise borrowed a fair few things from discontinuity systematics, and I'm planning on reading Wise's paper too. So don't nobody jump on me because I read Remind's paper. I'm going to read the other one too. It's just I can only read one of them at a time. And Wise's paper, if I remember correctly, is significantly longer too, so that's going to take longer. And my voice was not up to it when I recorded that on Monday. So the problem with Remind's model really is it's just not been fleshed out enough. He put together a nice bare bones, but there needs to be more work to flesh it out to a point where it's usable. I'm not entirely sure in its current state it's usable. Now I've read his book where he fleshes it out some more, but none of that stuff's ever appeared in the peer-reviewed literature, or at least not under his name. So I think that it would be useful to have that fleshed out a little bit more before we really went down that rabbit hole, at least too far anyway.
Well, my feeling is that sometimes we treat what people say almost like it's canon or scripture. It's like it's just these are works in progress, and at least we have to get it started. Now, having me come from a math background, it's like we don't have discussions like that. I just like it is, the precision of the language is so exact. it's just it's really different. And so, I've had to say some of these ideas that we argue over. It's like, well, I kind of would like to settle it with mathematical proofs and whatever, and I just and experiments, and it's really hard. So there's almost a theological metaphysical quality about some of these arguments, and
to an extent.
And I think we're making it more rigorous. So I can even, some of the concepts also that we used to argue over and what we focused on, I just have to say it's changed just because we know so much more.
Mm-hmm.
And there are things that we approach that, we didn't even think about back then. So I'm just going to say, why is this kind of a beloved book for me? All right, 20 years ago, this was all I had. Stuff like this. And Remind's book stood out because it was the first creationist book that didn't mention the Bible. Now that might really offend some people. And I said, well, for me, John 10:38, Jesus said, if you do not believe me, believe the works. And I said, Lord, I really appreciate you saying that. I mean, you're God, I better appreciate it. But I'm glad it was recorded because I was in a situation where I was about to leave the faith. And I said, well, I'd like to believe the scripture, but don't we have any independent evidence? Can we start from a simpler worldview of like, well, let me just look around and see what I have in my life, and what I could see, and what I can infer from what I see, I'm more willing to believe. And that's where I began, and that's why I was excited about this book. And it's really beautiful to see that this book is honored. I went to ICR last year. I'm hoping to go again in about 10 days. And his book is on their shelves. I mean, he's revered among the creationists, and his name is hardly known outside of creation. I mean, outside of the elite circles. The elites know who he is. But
the scientists know who he is, but most people in the general pew, unfortunately, more people know He Who Shall Not Be Named, who you did a stream on the other day, than they do Walter Remind. And that's really sad because the science is the science comparison is not even close. Hopefully, Peter. Hopefully.
Probably not for me. And it's more logistical. So some other things are happening. Hey, but you know what? I got to meet Peter in person. He came out here for the Percival Creation Biology Society. And so that was really cool. So sorry, I interrupted you. So we were talking about Remind. So the other thing is he contributed a lot to population genetics. I mean, he was the first creationist that really studied it well and thoroughly. And we just lost Emory. Okay, so I'm going to do a monologue here until hopefully we recover Emory. Walter Remind was the pioneer of creationist population genetics. It led to the formalisms that we took, and we actually got published in secular peer-reviewed Springer Nature reference work, which is a big deal for us. That was an absolute miracle, and a lot of that began with Remind. He took an approach that was also just very scholarly, not popular. A lot of creationists, the reason I was revering his work, like I would go to the ICR website and they, I'm looking for information about this or that. They'd have a one-page article, just like, I'd kind of like more depth,
Yeah.
And Remind was like, oh my goodness, this creationist book read like my physics textbooks. It was so hard. And I went up to Walter afterward. I said, I had a hard time understanding. He said, "Oh yeah, I really appreciate the feedback." It's like, Walter, some of the stuff was really thick. So,
Mhm.
but I felt that was the level of rigor I needed to help me. And so the influence on my life is we were able to get into secular peer review. And
Mhm.
John Sanford and William Basner in the Journal of Mathematical Biology set records by a factor of 4 for the number of downloads. And the editor took notice. It's like, we never had that many. We had like 24,000 downloads of the paper they wrote.
That's a lot of downloads for a science paper.
Yeah. And the editor's like, wow. Okay. So this all began with Walter Remain. So, I mean, his influence is matriculated. And then he's the co-founder of Baraminology. I mean, I don't know how much they may revise history, but this is he and Kurt Wise were the co-founders. I mean, that was among the Creation Biology Society back 15 years ago. They said, yeah, it was started by Walter Remain and Kurt Wise, and they have since parted ways in the way they view things, and then at other levels. I mean, it's kind of well known. This isn't anything that isn't known.
Yeah.
A little bit of dirty laundry there. So, he has heard me speak, and he thanked me for acknowledging him when I give talks. Before the faculty, like at Liberty University, when I talked, I said, I'd like to acknowledge Walter Remain. He started all this for me. And then when I talked about Fisher's fundamental theorem, I said, and I addressed Christian faculty, I said, I acknowledge Walter Remain. And he was in the audience too, and he said, thank you. I really owe a lot to him because he was extremely. So a lot of the creationist organizations like, ICR, AIG, they have a big geology component, and Walter didn't really touch very much on that. He focused on the biology.
Yeah, and I have noticed that there's and even this is even true of a lot of the research papers. A lot of the research papers are geology or astronomy. And okay, I understand, particularly with the astronomy question of the, distant starlight and so on. I understand there's a lot of focus on that. In geology, there's dinosaur soft tissues. There's a lot of focus on that. And biology, well, most of the biology papers are baraminology papers. They don't really get into a lot of much else.
Yes. And so the niche that was taken up was by the Discovery Institute for the biology. And they've done an outstanding, oh my goodness, it's so good now. Randy Galuza, how do you pronounce his name? Galuza joins on the engineering group.
You bet him. I haven't. I pronounce his name and you can't.
I better know how to pronounce his name. I should add when I'm down there at ICR. He took me out to lunch. It's so funny. They said Salvador Cordova's here, and he knew who I was. They said, bring him to my office. I was actually there to see Brian Thomas last year, and Randy brought me right in his office. The first thing he said, well, I disagree with everything Dr. Sanford says, as far as, some of his views. He said, but can I take you out to lunch? I'm like, sure, let's do that. I mean, I said, this is healthy. I said, okay, I could do business with someone like that, just straight up, blunt, and, civil and diplomatic. It's like, hey, it's cool. We could disagree. We'll hang out. Let's just, that's cool. I could totally deal with doing business like that. And later on, just FYI, you and I did something on, it was a Nerd Nexus where we were talking about the definition of fitness, and we were just laughing
for like that.
4 hours. Because this was a paper that was a collection of stuff that Dr. Sanford asked me to write, and Dr. Sanford sent it to Randy, and he said, "Oh yeah, Sal's just a bundle of energy, and I'll look over this." So, we're on good terms. You know, we'll just see how this turns out. Um, okay, so look, there it is, and you know, disagree on some points. Yes, see, this is cool.
Yep.
This is the way science really should move forward. You know, we have unfortunately a habit of trying to run scientific research, including creation science, like church, and it's like, no, you don't do it that way.
Science and church are two different things.
Yeah, you know, we tend to treat our scientific ideas and defend it like theological doctrines. It's like, guys, one experiment can overturn anything we do, and one observation, and you just got to be, we put things forward tentatively. So anyway, I was just saying that the Discovery Institute has taken over a lot of the creationist biology, quote unquote. It's not really creationist biology, but it has a lot of the improbability arguments to the level. And then they also focus, they may not use the word discontinuities, but there are a lot of concepts there. And Walter Riemann was actually a Discovery Institute fellow. It was a big deal for him.
Although they may not use the word discontinuity, but I'm fairly certain, if I recall correctly from my reading of Edge of Evolution, that's effectively where Behe ended up.
Yep. So Walter Riemann's influence has been there. He's also known a lot of the DI fellows from way back when. I mean, this is like in the mid '80s. I mean, the guy has just been around, and I think I could share this. Walter, if it's too personal, I'm sorry, but he said, I said, why'd you write the book? He said, I was going through a crisis of faith, and he said, I just kind of like me, he was going through a crisis of faith, and he said, I'm just going to start off looking at the science. I'm not going to go from a metaphysical starting point, one that like Christianity. And I'm just like, this is so me. And so it's reflected in the book that it's amazing. He doesn't, to my knowledge, he doesn't mention God, but he says the word creationist. And so the implication is there's a creator, and I'm just like, okay, I can deal with that. This is exactly what I'm trying to do. Is can we infer? So those are just my general thoughts about biotic message.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to say, so, yeah, he didn't have anything about Noah's flood, and he said,
as best I recall, and I again, it has been a while since I finished the book. It's been a while, but he basically just talked biology, which for me was also very interesting for me. Now I'm not. When I read the book, I hadn't even started my master's yet, so I was a little bit further maybe behind the 8 ball than I am now. I think probably do need to read it again and understand a little bit more of it this time through, because it is not written at the layman level. You need some science knowledge to understand some of the stuff he talks about.
Yes. So let's go into discontinuity systematics. We'll just talk about it, and then we're going to have some fun with a Proceedings National Academy of Science paper, which is relevant to a publication I'm trying to push. And there are 3 researchers with me on this. And we don't know if we're going to be able to get it through peer review. I mean, we got a miraculous opportunity to get in the Springer Nature reference work, and it's on university shelves now. Because the editor approached us and he said, write about everything you want. And it's like, John, we won't have another chance like this. We're gonna just
you get a that is the ultimate gift horse right there. That just hands you whatever you want and says, here, go for it, guys. Okay.
Okay, so let's let me share my screen, and I don't know that we'll get another opportunity like that, but the PNAS paper relates to our current project. But in the interim, let's cover so this is where the word came in. Discontinuity Systematics.
You have a PDF of that?
Actually, you know what? I Googled and it's just available. And I don't know if Walter told me.
You are kidding me. I have got to go find that now.
All right, I'm going to put it. All right, this is public. I was not the one who put this on the net. And I got to tell you a funny story. There was a time that they only had used, Walter had a number of books in storage or whatever. And I think Amazon only had used books available. Somehow there was something that, Walter wasn't able to supply it to Amazon or whatever. I don't know all the details. But a copy of his book was on the used book market. It was one time retailing for $1,000. I said, "Hey, Walter, look at this." And he was laughing. He said, "I can't give this away for free. How is it that someone listed his book and it's $1,000?"
Well, when I remember when I bought it, I was really concerned because I'm like, is this book going to be worth it? Because it wasn't $1,000, but it was not cheap. And I'm like, is this book going to be worth the amount of money I'm spending on it? And then I got it and read it. And yes, it was.
I'm sorry, I missed what you just said. The last.
So I originally bought the book, and I did not buy it for $1,000. I'm never buying a book at that price. Sorry, Sal, I'm not buying your reference book either.
Yes. Oh, yes, guys. What Dr. Sanford and I wrote, it's in a reference book that costs $1,500.
Precisely why I'm not buying it.
But it's on university shelves.
If I ever win the lottery, I will buy a copy of your book just so that I can say I have it.
All righty, thank you. But universities have bought it. It is on university shelves, so we're thrilled about that. But anyway, so you were saying, but it was pricey.
I don't remember what I paid for it, but it was not cheap. I remember looking at the price and going, "Man, that's a lot for a book. Do I really want to buy this book at that price?" And I remember thinking about it for a couple of days and going, is this book going to be worth it? Do I really want to buy it? And I finally went, you know what? I've heard a lot of good things about it. I got to at least try it. And I got it. And then I went, oh, this was worth every penny I spent on this.
Yes. So guys, I mean, at this point, sincerely, and Walter's a friend. A lot of the discussion is, it's not at the forefront. It is of deep interest as a historical contribution to creationism. And like I said, you might read this book and it's like, how did that lead to the Springer Nature publication we had? It's like, well, it's a long trail, but this was kind of the quote unquote genesis of a lot of trains of thought. And this is where baraminology had a lot of its beginnings. Maybe not in this book, but you could see the train of thought because it's the same guy who co-founded baraminology. And the fact that it was so powerful that he covered population genetics. It's like no creationist had covered that. And not even the Discovery Institute covered it. And part of the reason is it's really tough mathematically. It is just painful reading, and we had to try to simplify it. That's why when you and I had our talk, I was just trying to simplify the essentials and cut through a lot of the garbage. And there's a lot of garbage in population genetics as far as evolutionary theory. And you don't see it because you're just lost in these equations. You don't realize, all this mathematical theatrics, a lot of it's just garbage. It's just theatrics. There's some aspects of it that are really, really good, like, the fixation of alleles and all. That's cute. But it was like at the end of all this, it's like, how does that mean that the eye is going to evolve from lesser forms? It's like, no, it dodged the most important issues. So, but it has the look of a real academic field when, some of its fundamentals are just not there as far as the definition of fitness and natural selection. But I think it was a big deal that we can, we're actually starting to see this. And so in all these fights about natural selection as a mechanism and all, this is taking it from a different angle and saying we're looking at the whole field of natural selection as an idea as being kind of not even well defined. It doesn't even meet the criteria of what we consider scientific theory. And to the extent that they begin to make it like fit the criteria of a scientific theory, it's falsified. Good example is Lenski. Um, uh, the genome decays despite sustained fitness gains. The title of a 2017
that has got to
paper.
be one of the funniest paper titles of all time.
I know. And I was just like, okay, all right, so let's grant that natural selection happens. This is what happens experimentally. And we can find numerous examples, and this agrees with theory from what we know about complexity. So, okay, so when you make it testable, it actually fails. When you don't make it testable, well, it's not even a scientific theory. So, so Walter contributed to that. I would say for me personally, that was one of the biggest things. And that put my career on the map, basically. I could say, hey, young earth creationist, my work is on university library shelves in a good venue. And it put, Dr. Sanford was an already accomplished scientist, but it led to the most downloaded, the most studied paper in the Journal of Mathematical Biology. So good on you, Walter. So this is a chance for me to just gush over my good friend. And let me just say a quick prayer for him. Lord, wherever Walter is, be with him. In Jesus' name, amen. So here's discontinuity systematics. Why don't I just read a paragraph or so? Actually, you have
I've already downloaded it, Sal. I've got it.
Would you like to read it for us?
Sure, I can read it. Let me find that section in the book though. It's 500 pages in PDF, so it's going to take me a second to find that.
Yeah, it's 447. And
okay, that helps.
It's chapter 24. One of the things that'll help you is that the title of the chapter is often at the upper. So why don't we just read a little bit of this, and we can revisit it again. I want to go on to the PNAS paper.
Okay, how far do you want me to read, Sal?
Let's just read a couple paragraphs, and then we'll reflect and just decide if we're going to go on.
Okay, right. So starting at the beginning. Creationists recognize that organisms change and vary, yet they also see that life's predominant pattern is discontinuity, like a pattern of large morphological gaps and an absence of large-scale phylogeny. Sorry, life has a pattern of large morphological gaps and an absence of large-scale phylogeny. This pattern is now the central issue in the question of biological evolution or creation. Evolutionists believe in a fundamental continuity of life. They believe life is interrelated by evolutionary processes, the foremost being descent with modification. Accordingly, they expected life to show phylogeny and gradual intergradations of life forms. Since the mid-70s, however, evolutionists have increasingly acknowledged the existence of discontinuity. They proposed punctuated equilibria as an evolutionary theory consistent with that perception. Therefore, the pattern of discontinuity is an increasingly important matter even to evolutionists. Despite the significance of discontinuity, there was, until recently, no systematic method for studying it. Traditional systematic methods are completely insensitive and blind to discontinuity. Hinigian cladistics and Darwinian taxonomy assume the continuity of life and question the matter no further. All the traditional methods focus on the identification of hierarchical data structures such as phenograms or cladograms. These have the shape of a tree, yet the life forms are located only at the tips of the branches, not along the branches. These data structures never place life forms into a phylogeny of ancestor-descendant relationships and never identify continuity or discontinuity. A new method, discontinuity systematics, helps scientists probe the pattern of common descent. It also provides a coherent method of communicating and constructing knowledge. Lastly, it enables creationists and evolutionists to identify and debate their differences.
actually, this is a good stopping point.
Mm-hmm.
Hennig, Willie Hennig. Oh my goodness. It's so funny. All right, so there's all this thing about Claydism and Henniganism,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really funny. Even Joe Felsenstein said this is a funny society, the Claydists, the morphological Claydists,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, they're very dogmatic and almost theological in the way they handle
Mm-hmm. I've
cladistics.
read the phylogenetic literature. It is very, very dogmatic.
And so it was really funny to hear evolutionists themselves talk about the Hennigan Society. And there are a lot of terms that came from Hennig, I think, like
Mm-hmm.
synapomorphy.
I've read Hennig's original book, not in German,
Oh,
in English.
oh my goodness. Ow.
Yes, it hurt. It hurt.
Ow. Weird torture, man.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, I figured if I was going to understand phylogenetics, I had to go way back to the source and read Hennig. And oh my, did that hurt? Oh, sheesh.
Oh.
So, Hennig. Well, I will say this much for Hennig, though. Hennig drew his trees by hand. Which, if you think about the number of characters that are involved in some of these phylogenetic trees, that would have taken days or weeks to draw a single tree to match all that stuff up, because he was doing all this before computers. So I'm not taking away from the guy's intellect, but oh my, was that dense reading.
Okay. Wow. Go on.
Yeah, so that was very, very dense reading. In my research about Hennig, I also discovered that
Oh, we got cut off. Your audio got clipped. All right, so we have an audio problem. And Paleologos, can you still hear me? Can you still hear me, Paleologos, if you're there? Am I the one that got cut off? Okay, my internet connection is okay. Let me verify if my video is working. Hang on. I'm going to check my internet connection. One moment. I have another computer that I could test this. All right. So anyway, Peter, have you studied Hennig in cladistics? So Emory's back online.
I apologize. I don't know why my internet is having issues tonight.
It's the gremlins.
Yeah, apparently.
So we were talking. Okay, I was just saluting you, and one thing about this whole thing about the study of phylogenetics or whatever, it is so hard to it is so hard to deal into this without without being somewhat of a historian of thought. Because there are thoughts that come and go, and stuff that's fashionable go, kind of wander in and out, kind of like neo-Darwinism. And so it's really funny to see. That's one thing I wanted to say. Biotic message really attacked neo-Darwinism. But it's like that's so, it's no longer fashionable to attack it because it's kind of like by the wayside, in my opinion. I don't know of any like cutting edge evolutionary biologist that's defending neo-Darwinism anymore. So I mean, in a sense, biotic message has won, kind of won the battle on that, and it's just kind of just been forgotten because it was focused so much on neo-Darwinism. So anyway, And Bread of Life is here. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Rebecca. How you doing? Yeah, I would agree to a certain extent that you do have to know some history. Fortunately, my hobby is history, so I can go down these roads and ferret out people and go down into rabbit holes to find people. But I know that's not everybody's cup of tea, so I understand that. But you to understand the way that phylogenetics works now, and then the cladistic classification works thereafter, you do sort of have to have a background in understanding where it came from, what the point of it was, and so on, and understand a little bit about how it works and how and and more I guess more importantly the underlying assumptions.
Yes.
Because this has always been sort of my curse. I don't want to know how, I want to know why. So when I started reading the phylogenetic literature, I wanted to figure out how to make a phylogenetic tree, but I also wanted to know why. Like why you were doing things this particular way. And when you started drilling down to the assumptions, some of the assumptions are really funny, because there was one paper I found, and it wasn't by an unknown author either. It was somebody who regularly writes in the phylogenetic literature, where he literally said, "Yeah, well, we assume evolution is true, and then use our phylogenetic trees to demonstrate evolution." He literally said that.
Okay, that there's so much of that in evolutionary biology that would, the whole basis of it would, I would flunk first level logic in my math classes with that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So by the way, my other more frequent co-host Rebecca is here, and I need to explain to her what's going on.
You mean your better looking co-host, right, Sal?
Huh?
You mean your better looking co-host, right, Sal?
You caught me. I just had to nerd out today. I just, whenever I can get a hold of Emory, he and I can just nerd out, and we're just in our element. And we know, oh my goodness, one time we had a nerd talk that lasted 6 hours. It was bad. It was bad.
I remember that. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. That was wonderful. Oh my goodness.
It was amazing, but I swear we bored everybody else to tears.
Yeah. So, okay, how does this relate to my work? And this is where I take it to a different, maybe an idea might have some traction in one discipline and then it actually works really well in another. This really works well in the discontinuity among protein families. And this is so obvious that even Dr. Dan and Aaron Ross said, there's no effing common ancestor for all proteins. I'm just like, yeah. When the discontinuities are that acute that even evolutionists admitted, I said, this is where we can, this is where, it may not be traditional baraminology, but it's like, yeah, there's no common descender. Even you admitted it. No effing common ancestor. And so I had a debate with Aaron Raw, as many of you know, and it was Cindy Lincoln and Dr. Chris Thompson. And in the aftermath of that, there was also an email chain because Cindy likes to continue. She's just a very relationship-oriented person as far as like, let's be nice to these people and have a dialogue. And it's like, oh, yeah. But anyway, she got Aaron talking, and then Aaron gave us permission to publish the emails. He was saying, Sal, you're not a smart man, and just started saying all these things. And he said, you've been, what's the big deal? There's no effing common ancestor for all proteins. I'm just like, dude, you just gave it away, man.
Mm-hmm.
So I began, how this happened, I was in a bioinformatics course, and I was just noting you have these islands of isolation, and then it's not really well admitted in the evolutionary literature. Doolittle tried to get a phylogeny for all proteins. It's like, okay, why don't we just try to think if we start from one functional protein, if we can diversify from that? because it looks so powerful when you can get one protein family. It looks like you can build all these phylogenies. It's beautiful. And it looks like it serves common descent. But Doolittle kind of sensed there would be a problem. You can't unify it. And that quote I have to get from Paul Nelson. I mean, Paul Nelson is a young Earth creationist that works with the Discovery Institute. He's again just one of these incredible, just studious. He's like you, Emory. It's scary. I mean, this is stuff he will read to dig up. And I had said, people saying, Sal, no one ever said all proteins descended from a common ancestor. And I said, that's not my point anyway. I'm not saying anyone said it. And Paul Nelson found that quote. Doolittle was kind of troubled by that. He saw the problem that you cannot unify. You have discontinuities at the very base.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, I interact with the baraminologist. I'm saying, you're sometimes it feels to me, it's like, okay, I respect you guys trying to do this, but I said, you have a really easy time when you're trying to do this at the protein level, rather than whole organisms. You can definitely see the discontinuities at the protein level. So I said in my talk at, and I've done rehearsals publicly, so a lot of people know about my Big Liberty talk this last year, Creation Biology 2022 conference.
Mm-hmm. CRSQ conference. Yep.
Right, the CRSQ conference. I said that, okay, if you look at the architecture of a car, the cars have evolved. They look morphologically about the same, but it's the internals that are radically different. So a modern car modern cars has tons of computers in them, to integrate their, a lot of electronics to handle their ignition, computerized electronics to handle the engine, computerized electronics for the GPS. There are all sorts of sensors now. And good night, Paleo Logos. Thanks for joining us. God bless you. Working on good for you, man. And another one taking after you, Emory. Another best. I mean, all these students really put me to shame because I was really never a good student. I clunked through school. I had my moments. I would get A's or F's. That's been my history. So if I were on my game, I'd hit it out of the ballpark. Otherwise, I just struck out. And I wish I were more steady, but my temperament's just kind of, it's just, I'm very temperamental. But anyway, I said, look at the parts of the car. You cannot unify them under one common ancestor, even conceptually. You can do that with the whole morphology, the whole system. But at the level of the parts, it breaks down. And discontinuities are so acute. And so you have geometric discontinuities for the parts of a car, but that's the same for proteins, but also at the sequence level. It's very distinct. And greetings, Joseph Tim Merriman. So that's my feeling about discontinuity systematics. We may argue about baraminology and the organismal level, but discontinuity systematics works so well at in terms of protein families, probably families of actual systems. Like, for example, we have like 40 architectures of the eye. And even the evolutionists will say they didn't have the same common ancestor.
Yeah.
So we can, rather than, we're so bent, understandably, the creationists are so bent on on common descent at the organismal level, but you have tons of discontinuities in terms at the system and at the protein level. How people have said, doesn't that translate into critiquing common descent at the organismal level? It's like, I don't go there. It's enough for me to know what I say is, let's assume common descent. You would need miracles of special creation to make it work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to an extent, I think it would translate, but it's difficult to draw a line where that would be precisely necessarily. Because most traits, not all, but most traits, have a genetic component to them in some way. And what you'd have to look at then is the gene or group of genes that codes for whatever it is you're looking at, and then trace that through ancestry, which gene trees don't always agree with whole organism trees anyway. So you got that whole catastrophe to start with. Which, by the way, if whole organism trees are true, the gene tree should agree with them, and vice versa. Right? There's a significant problem there. And you do have some recombination probably, but still, you should get some of them to agree. And they usually don't. But you get a whole. It's a complicated question. Trying to take that discontinuity from the protein level and move it up to the organismal level. Now, the one thing that I will say, though, is that families of proteins are not the same as families of organisms, because families of proteins include proteins from all kinds of different organisms, exactly. Which means you have to explain how all the different protein families ended up in whatever organism they're in, rather than where in a family of organisms, you're assuming that there's common descent within the family, potentially, baraminologically speaking. But with a family of proteins, at least for a creationist, there's no common descent for those proteins. They were all just designed into whatever group they happen to be in. So there are some differences between the two things, and which makes the extension partially difficult as well, I think.
Right. See, I'm kind of glad you're saying this, because people have tried to say, encourage me to take it one step further. I said I'm just not going there, and I'll say the simple reason is, and I've asked Dapper Dino this, and some people dodge the question because they know what it would mean. I said, if Earth is young, there's no universal common ancestry for organisms. So we as creationists might be interested then just kind of, then what were the original created kinds? We, either we're actually trying to say, sometimes they're trying to make a argument. I mean, this is how I see it from a popular perspective. I'm not saying this is the formal perspective. Mm-hmm. So it seems like they try to attack common descent and then also define created kinds or something like that. See, I'm not a baraminologist.
So creation baraminology does take shots at common descent, but it also takes shots at, it also tries to establish a created kind. Now, baraminology is more my thing than yours, I know. So, but my interest in baraminology is rather substantial, actually. I've done some videos about it in the past, and probably will do more in the future. I know I'm reading Wise's paper at some point, but the idea itself, I understand why people are so interested, because the question of, well, how do you fit all the animals on the ark, right? That question comes up regularly from the internet atheist. So I understand why people want that question answered, want those kind of questions answered. And one of the criteria that's used in baraminology is a discontinuity criterion. Now it's not the same criterion that Remind proposed, and my reading of the paper, Remind did things very differently than the way that his ideas have been incorporated into modern statistical baraminology. But there is something to be said for being able to cluster organisms into a proposed barometer, or holobarometer would be the word from Remind, and also be able to cluster other organisms outside that group. The problem with that means you're trying to do two things at one time, and sometimes that's really tough to do.
Yes. Can you excuse me for a moment? I think I have a book that talks about Hennig and the alternates. It might be valuable to you that I read some passages from Felsenstein, because this is an interesting conflict between the molecular phylogeneticists and the Hennigans.
Oh yeah, they're at each other's throats like crazy.
Oh, so you know this?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh no. I'm well aware of that. Oh yeah. The molecular guys and the morphology guys are at each other's throats like mad. It's legitimately funny, and it's actually quite helpful because what they do is they blow each other's arguments up, and then I just get to pick the pieces up and go, thanks guys.
Now, honestly, I mean, is there any parallel like that among the creation
community? They're not to the same level of nasty. Like some of the stuff I've read in the phylogenetic literature, I'm like, oh, how did that get published? But there is some back and forth between the morphology guys and the genetics guys. And this was one of my when I reviewed Paleologos's video. And sorry, Peter, that you're not here to hear this. This was one of my criticisms of it. Was he completely ignored the work by Matthew Cherhady, which is purely genetics. He talked quite a bit about Todd Wood's work and the other statistical baraminology's work with morphological stuff, but didn't touch on any of Cherhady's papers. And so there is a divide there, and I'm not an unreasonable one. I understand, particularly for fossils, you have to use morphology because we don't have DNA, unfortunately. But for living organisms, I don't see that DNA isn't something we should at least consider. The problem with this, it goes way back to like the 1990s when the first couple baraminology papers were done. I forget which paper it was. It was a Robinson and Kavanaugh paper, if I remember correctly. It may have been a Todd Wood paper. I don't remember now. But it was in the mid 90s. There was a paper that was published, and I think it was on cats, to be perfectly honest, where they, and I'd have to go look the exact paper up, but where they used some DNA data and they ended up tossing it because it was giving them aberrant results. When they took it out, they got results that made more sense. And effectively since then, nobody's touched DNA data, at least within the statistical baraminology community. Now, there's two problems there. One, it was 1995, 6, 7, somewhere around there. So DNA technology is still relatively primitive. We don't have very many whole genomes, if any. We don't have very many mitochondrial genomes. We don't have, so we're lacking a lot of the data that we have now. And two, just because one set of DNA sequences in one data set causes you problems does not mean that every set of DNA sequences in every data set will cause you problems. And this is something that kind of runs through the statistical baraminology field. And I don't want to be too hypercritical, especially since Peter's not here to stand up for them, because I know he would. But they never test anything. They throw it at the wall, see if it sticks, and if it sticks, then great. But if it doesn't, oh well. They always test on live data sets. They've never done a simulation study. And the only comparison study that's ever been done between two methods on the same data sets was a recent one where Wood brought up the Barclay methodology instead of the BDIST MDS methodology. And he basically said, yeah, it's close enough to be the same. Well, it's not close enough to be the same. There's significant differences between them. And even more so if you play around with it like I have. So and this comes up all the time. This is where they'll just change stuff or add stuff or take stuff out, and without seeing what it does before they do it. They'll just do it and then say, here are the results. Well, that's great that those results, but we can't compare those results to anything because there's been no grounding. There's been no testing. Yeah, you know that the program works and spits out the, expected results, expected, PDFs and MDS plots and so on, but you didn't test to see what happens if you use specific data sets with it. Like you just said, okay, here's a chimp human data set. We're going to run this together. Okay, chimps don't separate from humans, or they do. Okay, great. By the way, that test has not been done since 1996 with the current baraminology methods. And that was where I think that may have been the paper where they had to throw out the DNA in order to get the results they wanted to separate chimps and humans. Nobody's done it since 1996.
Well, Emory, if you want to talk about something else briefly while I run downstairs to get my book
That's
by
fine. Yeah,
Kelsey's
go ahead and grab the book. That's fine.
Go ahead.
And I apologize for my long-winded rant on baraminology. That's not my and I feel bad that I did it after Peter left, because I know Peter would have had comments on that. Peter, you can get a hold of me. I think I put my email addresses in one of the videos or more of the videos that I've posted. If you have a comment or concern or question or whatever on that particular issue, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to discuss with you. Matter of fact, I think you have my email address to remember, if I remember correctly. I think you sent me something at one point. So I think you may have sent me some slides or something. So if you want to comment on that, feel free to reach out, and I'll be happy to have a chat with you about that. That said, baraminology is something I do have a fairly strong interest in. It's not the only thing I'm interested in. I've got other things other irons in the fire, as it were, that I'm interested in. But that's something that tends to come up fairly regularly, because it's basically the only biology stuff that gets published in creationist circles, other than the odd paper like the Jeanson-Weil paper where they created new heterozygosity in natural processes paper. So there are odd papers here and there that come out, but that tends to be most of the biology stuff that's published in the creationist literature. But I do have other things that I'm interested in, and we'll talk about some of those here. And when Sal gets back, I'm hopeful we'll get to the Frameshift paper at some point. So baraminology, I guess this is why I did my video on, one of the reasons I did the video on discontinuity systematics is I'd like to see that developed out a little bit more, and maybe some of its ideas ported over into baraminology, because at the moment, baraminology, it has potential, but it has flaws, a lot of them. And the flaws need to be fixed before we can really say that it's a solid piece of it's a solid tool in the toolbox, if we'll put it that way. And the thing is, it's been running for 25 years, 30 years, like 25 years, I guess we'll say, at this point, and we still don't know that the tools themselves work. All that we know is that the tools will, they're functional. They don't, like, you can put data sets into them and they'll run analysis on the data sets. What we don't know is how good the analyses themselves are. And that's something that I would like to see tested a lot more than is currently being tested. That said, I do have other things that I'm interested in. I've got interests in speciation and post-flood diversity, interests in polyploidy. That's my pet hobby. I love polyploidy. You can get me talking for 20 minutes on polyploidy, just like you can on baraminology, and it's probably even more boring. But let's see, what else can we go through? I've not read the paper that Sal wants to talk about, so I can't cheat and get ahead in that. I guess we go back to Walter Remind's book while we're waiting on Sal to get back. The biotic message, folks. If you didn't download that article, that book, you really should. It's a very good book. And it's not short. It's something like 500 pages long. But it's well worth it. There are some. It's mostly just biology. There are a few things in there that are not biology, but most things are biology. And it puts forward Remind's idea about the biotic message, and that our life itself contains a message from a designer that shows that he exists. So it's not as Sal said, there's no scripture in there. And Remind himself says he only quotes creationists twice, and in both cases to disagree with them. The vast majority of his citations are from the secular literature. which I think is if you can, is the way to go. And it sounds like Sal is back.
I'm almost here, brother.
Almost. Okay.
Okay, so I'm upset. I can't find the book. I went through a lot of trouble to organize my library, and we have a bazillion bookshelves in this house. I mean, you can probably see it here. Now, this isn't, the background is a picture of my house, but you can see back there is the library. But then we have another, you've seen other pictures where we have even more bookshelves, like in the basement. And there are more bookshelves here in my command center. And there are books that are just piled away in boxes. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I mean, I have one full bookshelf and 2 half bookshelves that are both completely full. And I've got other books laying around the house. As well that I'd like to.
So I can't find it, but since you and I are on the same page about the Hennigans and the molecular phylogeneticists, and the thing that's funny is the molecular guys will still use a little bit of the Hennigan terms, like apomorphy, synapomorphy.
Yep. They'll use a lot of the same terms. Yeah, they do use a lot of the same terms.
So I got to tell you, it it does make me laugh. I said, you both can't be right. At least one of you guys is wrong.
Yeah. Yep.
And Biotic Message predicted, Walter Ismani is saying that you're going to have conflicts. You won't be able to unify your phylogenetic tree. The designer has designed it to prevent a phylogenetic inference. Oh, that's the other thing. That was the fundamental thing, is that Walter said the way that life was created, it's going to resist an evolutionary interpretation. And that has been kind of my bread and butter. I said, when I've been in discussions, text-based debates, not online debates, I mean, not live video debates, I said, even when I didn't know anything, I could say whatever they provided as evidence, there's going to be some future thing, or it's already available, that is going to overturn it. And I've never been disappointed. That's the fundamental thing I got out of Biotic Message. It is the claim that biology was designed to resist evolutionary interpretations, and I've never been disappointed. So we could say the same for abiogenesis. It's really brutally obvious with abiogenesis. Oh my goodness. So now we'll talk a little bit about the PNAS paper and its relation to my work, but we could talk about all of this. We'll revisit some of these topics later. If you have any just passing thoughts before we move on.
No, I think I'm good. We can jump into the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences.
Oh my goodness. I don't know how this passed peer review, much less proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. It was sponsored by Eugene Koonin.
That's how it passed peer review.
I was a student of one of his staff members, and I'm just like, how did it even pass you, Eugene? I mean, you ought to know better. I mean, this is awful.
What do we got? Let's see how bad it is.
All right, so we are writing a response to this paper, and I'm just like, I know we're going to get a lot of pushback in the United States because we're going after a PNAS paper. John Sanford and I overturned a PNAS paper. We tried to get it published, and it was stonewalled. The editors would say, well, you're right. Ono was wrong, who wrote the PNAS paper in 1984. And by the way, also a Nature paper. We overturned 2 papers, and they said, oh, well, that's old news. It's overturned. And it's like, it's still quoted in professional literature as valid. I'm just like, come on, guys. It was a hot potato. So I'm sorry, sour grapes here.
Well, that's fine.
You know why this happens is when you have a historical theory, you can make stuff up. There's no experiment that immediately overturns a claim, and so it can be just perpetuated by the peer review community. For experimental science, if you say that you can do this reaction, if you set up this apparatus, there's just like no question. It either will, if people are able to duplicate it, then it's like, yeah, you're good. And if they're not, then it raises questions. And worse yet, if they find an experimental flaw. And so all this stuff about the emphasis of peer review, I said, do we have that in the engineering world? Your stuff either works or not. There's no bothering publishing whether your rocket ship's going to fly. If it blows up on the launching pad, that's kind of proof you have to fix something. And if it flies, it flies. It's just, what. So it kind of alarmed me, all this thing about the importance of peer review. I came from a background where products, not what you publish, but what you produce, was more important in terms of physical experiments. And I'm going to be in a debate about the Big Bang, and we're just going to emphasize a lot of this is being perpetuated by peer-reviewed approval, not actual experiments. And this deviates from the traditions of physics, which is very experiment-based. And so let's just get to this paper, and you'll see kind of where I'm headed. So I'll read the abstract, and I'll give you some. It looks impressive, but I can't believe it passed peer review. And I don't want the PDF. Go away. Oh, well. I'm sorry. I'm getting this obnoxious thing. Maybe
That's fine. Just bring the PDF up and we'll read the PDF.
Yeah. Edited by Eugene Kuhn and National Institutes of Health. Frame shifts in protein coding sequences are widely perceived as resulting in either non-functional or even deleterious protein products. Indeed, frame shifts typically lead to markedly altered protein sequences and premature stop codons. By analyzing complete proteomes from all three domains of life, we demonstrate that, in contrast, several key physiochemical properties of protein sequences exhibit significant robustness against a +1 or -1 frame shifts. In particular, we showed that hydrophobicity profiles of many protein sequences remain largely invariant upon frame shifting. For example, over 2,900 human proteins exhibit a Pearson's correlation coefficient R between the hydrophobicity profiles of the original and the +1 frame shifted variance greater than 0.7, despite the average sequence identity between the two of only 6.5% in this group. By the way, too bad Peter's not here. I believe Pearson was Todd Wood's thesis advisor. I'll have to look up. But in any case, we observe the similar effect for protein sequence profiles of affinity for certain nucleobases, as well as protein sequence profiles of intrinsic disorder. Finally, analysis of significance and optimality demonstrate that frameshift stability is embedded in the structure of the universal genetic code and may have contributed to shaping. Our results suggest that frameshifting may be a powerful evolutionary mechanism for creating new proteins with vastly different sequences, yet similar physical chemical properties to the proteins from which they originate.
So I was reading ahead of you, and I just broke into an absolutely massive coughing fit because I was reading that and going, what on earth are these people playing at?
Okay, so how this came about, remember that paper I said by Ono in 1984? Ono was the first to propose that the nylon-eating bacteria evolved after 1935. It was reasonable. since nylon was invented in 1935, and I still get biologists today. They're like, "That's so stupid. It's obvious it had to evolve after." It's like, no.
Why? Why is that obvious?
Well, they think just because nylon got invented, um, and then a biological enzyme can break it down, it must have evolved that new ability. They're so in that evolutionary mindset. I'm just like, okay,
That was
so
the
a
point,
rock,
Sal. That was the point of the question. The question was there is no necessity that the enzyme does not predate the nylon.
that's evolutionary thinking.
I
And
know.
I was around, I gave a talk in my NIH class before all these postdocs, and there are a few just kind of snickering. And like when I said, this predated nylon, my professor backed me up on this, but the other guys in the class, the students there couldn't get it. Some of them, and they were just snickering. And I'm like, yeah, we could have an argument, but you're not worth my time, and you're a postdoc. That's pathetic.
Yeah,
They're postdocs in health-related matters, not evolutionary matters. So, these guys are smart in their field, but they're not really savvy on the nuances of evolution. Neither are the evolutionists themselves, by the way. But anyway,
I didn't say that. I thought it, but I didn't say it.
Yeah, okay, I said it. So, Ono said a frame shift caused the mutation that enabled bacteria to get this nylon digesting ability, and we overturned that, partly because it's been forgotten. Some researchers said the same thing 30 years ago, like 7 years after Ono published it. There was no retraction of the PNAS paper.
Of course not.
Yeah, because it's evolution. They get a free pass. No one has come forward and said, hey, that's the proceedings of the National Academy of Science, where, by the way, they were wrong. It was refuted on a number of lines later and forgotten. The NCSC came out and used that to say, proteins without God's help. This is an example. And it was very persuasive. Oh, my goodness. And it haunted me. And then Dennis Venema came out with his book in 2016 or 17, and God in the Genome or something. And he said, my favorite example of evolution is Ono. And it was his best example of protein evolution. It was so funny.
Yeah, that's a raging dumpster fire right there.
And Dr. Sanford called me up. He said, Sal, I think this is wrong. Can you look this up? And I did a genome search. I said, well, Doc, it's kind of, I call him John. I don't call him Doc, but you know what I mean. I think you may be right, but I don't have enough evidence. And I went to his house, drove back, and I said, let me give it a try. And then Joe DeWeese worked on the project, and I learned new bioinformatic techniques, and we just blew it out of the water. So the Frameshift thing was really very near and dear to Dr. Sanford's heart, because he wanted to go after Venema. And he said, let's get this paper published. And we got 7 rejections. And Venema has since backed down. And it's like, well, okay, your book has still done damage, dude, And it doesn't reflect well on you that your best example was actually something that had been long refuted. And Ken Miller of Brown University, who fought the intelligent design movement, he was advertising this. So then this paper comes out, and it says, it revisits Ono. This is Ono on steroids. Our results suggest that frame shifting may be a powerful evolutionary mechanism for creating new proteins. And I'm just like, what?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. We began to just analyze. So what if your hydrophobicity is preserved? So let me give you one howler. Okay, so they are correct to say it may preserve the sequences, but let's look at Okay, so immediately, what you can do is you could take a gene and just frame shift it in a any program and hypothetically say what would happen, and you immediately get all these stop codons. Almost always, there's one phenomenon we did find is of interest that I just haven't had time to pursue. There are some bacteria that don't seem on the on one of the strands, it will not have any stop codons in any frame. Dr. Sanford found that in our research on the nylon. It's like one strand doesn't have any frame shift stop codons. Yeah, so that's what are the odds of that? So on one strand of the DNA, you have your normal genes, and then on the other, there's no stop codons. That's an interesting phenomenon. This isn't a bacterial genome.
Mm-hmm.
But notwithstanding that, to me, that screams at design, honestly, and that's why he wanted me to look at it. Because you can't have random mutation and then have a genome that has no stop codons on one of the strands. And what would cause that is very interesting. Now, that was an old paper. Our sequencing methods are a lot better, so take that with a grain of salt. But you wanted to say something?
No. I'm fine. You're going. I'm just thinking about. I was trying to think about why you would have no stop codons on one strand of a.
Yeah. So I never had time to pursue it. See, this would be great for people to pursue. These are just beautiful questions that never get pursued. So, figure 5. Evolution of protein sequences via frame shifting. A. Frame shift enables major jumps in protein sequence space with little change in key physiochemical properties like hydrophobicity. B. Insertion or deletion indel results in a frame-shifted gene with potential premature stop codons. These can be removed by either single-point mutations or another indel-induced frame shift. Dude, do you guys know what this? Do you believe your own stuff? I mean, okay, so, which means if you're having random point mutations, you could be creating. Okay, for every stop codon that you may remove, don't you think that the same process can start introducing new ones in the strand?
No, this doesn't work. No.
Did you guys ever run an experiment?
Theoretically, in a perfect world, this might work, but this isn't a perfect world. A and B, your likelihood of managing to knock that stop codon out with an indel is effectively 0.
Well, okay, you saw exactly what I just like, dude. You're going to make these stop codons, and then you want to point me. Okay, figure B. We have a normal gene, and then now it's frame shifted, and you have all these numerous stop codons. That's not beyond dispute. And then you start erasing these stop codons with random mutations. I'm just like, no. If you had random mutations, all the functioning stuff, you could start introducing stop codons anywhere else. This is not going to work. And what do you do with this dead gene in the meantime that's frame shifted? If it's critical, like say for a topoisomerase, the thing, or a helicase, thing's dead. In this past peer review, proceedings in National Academy of Sciences, no less.
That figure alone should have gotten it rejected. Like, why did no peer reviewer go, oh, you can't just delete stop codons like that. That's not how that works. Oh, good night.
Now, Dr. Joel, to his credit, pointed out there is a plant or bacterium that in the translation process, it'll clear out stop codons. So this is some sort of gene editing. But I wanted to say, Well, first of all, thank you for that data point. But it's like, so you have complexity to condense one to remove a stop codon, uh, machinery. That can't be willy nilly. So um, I don't think this gets you out of the problem.
No, it doesn't get you out of the problem, and you have an additional problem here. If something's coming along and removing the stop codon, what it comes along and does is it's repairing what it perceives as a mistake in the DNA code. And
Exactly.
what that means is that it's going to put it back in its original state, which is not going to help you.
Yeah. I mean, what if you stop removing stop codons? Pure, I just don't know what to say. Okay.
This is sheer lunacy.
Okay, so I told you you're going to be in for a treat. I'm sorry.
Jeez Louise.
Okay, can we just laugh a little bit? I mean, I could be angry, or I could laugh.
If I laugh, I'm going to go into a coughing fit. So,
all right, okay, I got to credit them. They got some good style points because. All right, can we? I'm going to be a little bit tongue in cheek here. Oh, look at the reference section here. I mean, really impressive. 51 references. And
how long is the paper? 4 or 5 pages?
6 pages. And oh, look at these graphics. Oh man. I mean, yeah, graphics of this quality, it's got to pass peer review. Look at this. Oh, look at all these little heat map plots and all sorts of other plots. I mean, these are spectacular graphs. All right.
So they know. So congratulations. They know how to use R to produce graphs, and they know how to use Photoshop.
Bravo, bravo. Okay, so some theater can get you through. And I'm just like, guys, have you subjected this to experiment? How about we disable the gene with a frame shift? And I'll give you one. There is this thing called Tay-Sachs disease.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's often induced by a frame shift.
It's not the only disease often induced by frame shift.
Okay, so let's just take, okay, that's a frame shift in the final exon. But let's frame shift something early, like in the first exon.
Oops.
And let's, if it's a critical gene, I think the chances of you removing the point mutations are gone. Mm-hmm. I mean, introducing point mutations to remove the stop codons, that's one. Mm-hmm. Next, it's like, well, you're not going to have, if you're going to invoke random mutations, you're going to just for every one point mutation that you introduce that removes the stop codon, just mathematically, given the random distribution, you'll have 19 other codons that are going to change their
nucleotides.
Their nucleotides and therefore the amino acids. So by the time you remediate by the time you get a point mutation that remediates a stop codon, to make it something that we don't even know what. It's not even functional. We don't know. It could be a bad amino.
Certainly not be functional. Who knows?
Yeah. You've probably introduced more stop codons, and then you've scrambled the rest of the sequence. I mean, come on. It's not that hard.
Nope. They have effectively this. I don't even have words. Like, this is pure unadulterated lunacy.
Okay. So how did this come about? Grinch Lynchpin has, I want to credit him. He's an evolutionary biologist, anonymous, and, I will respect that. And we were talking about the protein orchard, and I said, okay, we were criticizing this paper, but a lot of our criticisms could be extensible to the protein orchard, but we focused on the frameshift. So we're saying, okay, I think this is a powerful new evolutionary mechanism. So I said, why don't we just take some well-studied proteins and let's frameshift them? Okay, some of them were multimeric. Just like, you know what? You have 60 interface points for the topoisomerase to dimerize.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is 1,400 residues. In 60, you need 60 critical connections. And you frameshift it. So what about your key physical chemical properties? I think that dimer is gone.
Yeah.
That's one. Two, you got all these, you have stop codons.
Mm-hmm.
And then I took a collagen. It has post-translational modifications about every 10 residues. Every 10 amino acids, you need a proline to be some hydroxy type group.
You need a hydroxyl group, probably an
Right.
probably an OH group. Yeah.
And that's key. Collagen is this fiber that holds us together. 30% of our protein weight is collagen in human. That's a lot. And so this is like it makes the fibrils. This is like making in building houses, you have structural iron and all.
Right.
Collagen's kind of analogous to that. It's obviously not iron, but
it's a structural protein. It
structural
helps
protein. You frame shift this.
You die.
Just go on.
Well, you frame shift this, and you're either dead or in a puddle on the floor.
Yeah. And I'm like, okay. So I said, obviously, with these proteins, it's not going to work. But there's some principles we can learn from here. I think it's very utopian. I don't know what the word is. It's very unreasonably optimistic to think that this will work for multimeric proteins. And there's a paper by Thornton that says most proteins are multimeric. I'm like, okay, so you're going to eliminate, how about most? What do you mean, say 70%? Right there, gone. And these are really important proteins if they're multimeric. I mean, often. So those are gone. And then you have the stop codon problem. And at most, you're going to get these really trivial polypeptides. I mean, you'd be lucky if you get one that's 50 residues long.
Yeah, it's.
And I'm like, so our paper is just like the limits of what this can really do. And it's like, after you're done, it's like, I don't think it's really, I'm not going to challenge that it's powerful, but it's really limited at what it can do.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, this past peer review.
Yeah, that diagram alone that I looked at should have been enough right there to say, nope, send this thing back.
And, to be fair, I mean, some people gave it a fair hearing. And I ran it by one individual who will not be named yet. He's a co-author. He studied, his PhD dissertation was on the insulin receptor. Mm-hmm. He read this paper. He said, I think that's a very interesting paper. It sounds good. And I said, I don't think it'll work. And he didn't have kind of the reaction you did, which surprised me. He went back and he looked at because he's an expert on he would be an expert on insulin receptors. And he said, yeah, I considered what a friendship would do. only one, even changing one residue on the insulin receptor, it's going to blow it apart. I'm like, yeah, so this isn't going to work. So in his own field, he saw it, but you saw this a lot quicker.
Well, see, I saw it from the genetic level. He was looking at it from the protein level. So
yes.
So he wasn't looking at it from the genetics. I'm looking at it from a genetics perspective because that's where I live. I live mostly in genetics. And so I looked at that and went, it don't work. That ain't gonna work. Because I know what those things do.
All right. And then another researcher who might be named eventually, he knows proteins. And in basic biochemistry, you have these, I don't know, I forgot the name of it. They have these diagrams of the psi and phi angles.
I vaguely remember this, but biochemistry was a long time ago.
Right.
I stay out of chemistry as much as I can.
So, there's more to an amino acid than it being hydrophobic or hydrophilic.
Yeah.
There are psi and phi angles. And if you get those wrong, your protein's just not going to, it may have a very different fold. Just because, the protein has to twist and whatever. And he said, I just don't see it. And there was one advocate of all this, and I gave a private talk and said why this is limited. He was upset. He said, no one said this is going to work with multimeric proteins. I'm just like, okay, maybe it's not full as we think. And they're also.
I don't think it would work with any protein, Sal.
Yeah. So this is an I'm just like, I really want to criticize this paper and not say it's stupid. Obviously, you have to use more scholarly language than that.
You have to come up with a way to say it's stupid in 5,000 words.
Yeah. So we'll say, here are the limits, and it would be, it'd be an interesting future investigation to see if, these are the characteristics you would have to evaluate each protein. Because they clearly, they said they did a survey of proteins and they said we preserved their key hydrophobicity. But like, dude, did you ever look to see did it preserve its actual function? And what about those stop codons, I mean, come on. So I think there is a pattern. They discovered something that's important. And I can't talk about it publicly right now because I have certain publications I'm trying to not talk about.
Right.
So they computationally found something of interest, and I'll share that with you backstage. But it's not what they think. Just like I think the patterns, and I've said, now what I can't say publicly, the patterns of similarity and diversity may lead you to think this looks like evolution, but it actually leads you to another, which is that it's optimized for scientific discovery. And I will probably give a show on that. And I could say that part of it publicly. But, they're like a lot of evolutionists, they're quick to say anything we find, it's a new thing for evolution that supports it. Or it's a new mechanism or whatever. They have to drive the headlines because they don't actually have substance there. And both Dr. Sanford and I that there is a little bit of a slight fail-safe mechanism. So we do know that the degeneracy in the genome is resistant to certain point mutations. It does help, and it helps kind of very important amino acids that are overrepresented. So that's one. It's beautifully optimized for that. The other thing is, it may be able to help a frameshift mutation a little bit. So like if you have something kind of at the tail end of the gene itself, if it gets frame shifted there, you still might be able to have a half functional protein, meaning that you've got most of the protein already coded, And hopefully, if it's just at the tail end that may be of little consequence, then maybe you can be okay. Or maybe it may have some consequence, but it's not the major thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's been computational research that it is optimized both for resistance to point mutations. That's well established. It's one of the most optimal codes uh, of the hierarchical codes. That's well established for point mutations. It may also be optimized for frameshift mutations as best as you can do it, which isn't much. But of all the hypothetical codes, this is the most optimal, and people have noticed this. Now, I don't research into that much, but so I think they have they're on to something there, but it's not what they think. So I will revisit this more. I'm specifically trying to develop a paper with 3 co-authors that will attack this. But really, if you extend what we were saying to just any sort of random mutation or any random sequence, trying to make a new protein out of it, you have the same constraints. You have to avoid getting stop codons, and that's not trivial, especially the longer the gene is.
Mm-hmm.
If it's multimeric, that's going to be hard to get something that will be multimeric in a functional way.
Yeah.
And then also if it has very important post-translational modifications. So we won't say for all proteins, but look at the collagen. And then also proteins that need other proteins to exist to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
So collagen needs at least 5 other proteins to make it function.
Mm-hmm.
And this reinforces why, as Aaron Ross said, there's no effing common ancestor for all proteins. Not that I'll put that in peer review. I wish I could cite that in my peer-reviewed paper.
Yeah, I don't think that would fly with the reviewers. Although this did, so maybe that would. I don't know.
I don't know. So that's all I had for tonight. I'm glad you got a laugh out of how bad this paper. Hey, but hey,
I'm gonna have nightmares about that paper.
Now, hey, if anything, this tells you the importance of R. If I don't have substance, this is the way I could pretty it up and look sophisticated.
Yeah.
So, do you have any closing thoughts? We're at an hour 45 minutes. I think I have to get to work.
No, I think that's a good way to close it out. I think we've made our point very vividly.
All right. Can you close this out in prayer, and then I'll just have I'll have closing music in the backstage if that's okay with you.
Not a problem. Sure, yeah. Dear God, our Heavenly Father, I humbly come before you, praising and glorifying you for allowing us to be here tonight. Thank you for your word. Thank you for the great blessing that you are to us. Lord, I pray that you'll just help us as we seek to learn more about your creation and to honor and to glorify you through everything we say and do. I pray that you'll just bless Sal as he continues his work. And Lord, I pray you'll also help us to glorify you and honor you in everything we say and we do, and help Sal to be able to get this paper together to respond to this absolute piece of garbage. And I pray that you'll just give the reviewers blindness to the fact he's a creationist and open minds to hear what the truth actually is. I ask this, Father, in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. So I'll meet you backstage after I do the closing credits. Hey, we have 0 viewers, buddy.
How about that?
Oh, well. We had a good time. I'd like to thank everyone that did visit. Ray's still here. Praise God. So, God bless.